Hello everyone, my name is Raymond and I am a game developer and the creator of the Street King. Welcome to my third devlog for Left Turn Legend, a crazy endless racer that parodies NASCAR and other oval circuit racing leagues. I've continued working on both the visuals and gameplay since my last video. That being said, let's get started by looking at gameplay additions. I've mentioned in the past how I want the game to have lots of crazy obstacles, but so far, the only things to avoid have been other cars. However, I've just added the first non-car obstacle to the game, oil spills. Every once in a while, a racer will spawn in with a broken down car that leaks oil onto the road. If you drive over these puddles, you'll slide out of control. Hitting these puddles can be pretty devastating, and they can also lead to some crazy crashes. The other racers are affected by spills too, so watch out! To get the oil spills to render correctly on the ground, I had to use some shader tricks. Normally, when you put two surfaces too close to each other, you end up with this ugly effect known as Z-fighting. Z-fighting happens because the graphics card can't figure out which surface is closer to you and should be drawn on top, so you get a messy effect where both surfaces fight to be on top instead. A common trick in other games is to make things float slightly above the ground. This looks alright if you don't pay too much attention, but it's pretty ugly once you notice it. I wanted to render the oil spills properly, so I set out to program a custom solution. I realized that I could take advantage of how transparent surfaces are handled differently from other types of geometry. In order to explain how this works though, we need to start with how solid objects work. Usually, opaque surfaces are drawn in an arbitrary order. To figure out what should be drawn on top, a depth buffer keeps track of how far each pixel was from the camera when it was drawn. If a newly drawn object is closer than the old object, then the renderer throws out the old pixel value and replaces it with the new one. Take a look at how the depth buffer for this scene looks. Brighter pixels represent things that are further away. With transparent objects, this doesn't work since you can have pixels that are partially see-through, so the order that they're drawn in actually matters. In most cases, the scene will render transparent objects from back to front after everything else is done. As a result, the transparent objects don't actually modify the depth buffer. This is exactly what we'll take advantage of to get the oil spills to look right. To start, we'll use a feature called the render queue to force the road to render before everything else in the scene. Remember, the road is opaque, so the order that it's drawn in doesn't matter. Next, we'll use the render queue to draw the actual oil spill. Using this bit of code in the shader that says Z-write off, we're disabling writing to the depth buffer since our oil spill has transparent parts. Next to it, Z-test off tells the oil spill to always appear on top of anything else that's already been drawn. This means that no matter what, the oil spill will always render on top of the road with no Z-fighting. Now that we're done with the oil spill, we can finally draw the rest of the scene. Since we used Z-write off in the shader, it doesn't change the depth buffer, which means that anything that's supposed to be rendered in front of the road still is. The final result is pixel perfect with no ugly Z-fighting or floating oil spills. As I mentioned last video, the grandstands can seat around 50,000 people. That's a lot of people to render, and Left Turn Legend needs to run on mobile devices, so I had to come up with a way to render lots of people without being too performance intensive. I decided that the people in the crowd would all be 2D, but that didn't mean that I couldn't make them interesting. I started by trying to just use 2D images to represent the people. This worked okay, but I felt like it didn't have the level of depth that I wanted. The people were too flat and didn't have any detail, so I went back to the drawing board. I decided to create a full 3D model of a person. While I can't use this model for the final product, what I can do is use it to help me create 2D images. To give a 2D person depth though, I would need a way to fake lighting effects. To start, I wrote a shader that renders a normal map for the 3D model. A normal map is basically a way of converting the directions that a surface points into a 2D image. By storing the surface directions, also called surface normals, lighting effects can be faked to give the illusion of more complex geometry. Using this normal map, I now have a way of making a flat person look 3D. Filling the crowd with these normal mapped people looks a bit better, but it still isn't quite there. For one thing, the crowd is perfectly still. For another, there's no variation. Giving the people random colors helps make things more vibrant, but it still didn't fix the problem of the crowd looking too stiff. I went back to the 3D model of the person, created a few more poses and animation frames, and regenerated the crowd. With varied poses and animations, the crowd feels much more alive. The final step to creating the crowd was to add in flashes to simulate cameras and other light sources. I decided that the easiest way to have lots of randomly generated flashes pop in and out would be to use a particle system. First, I 3D modeled a surface that represents the areas that particles are allowed to spawn in because I didn't want them appearing where there weren't any people. Then, I created a particle system in Unity and set the emission area shape to use the model that I just made. Add in a texture for the particle, play around with some settings, and voila! The crowd now has a lot more character. That concludes my third devlog for Left Turn Legend. I'd like to give a special thanks to my King patrons, This Face Thing and TLM10's Gaming, for supporting my games. If you want to help out, please don't hesitate to check out my Patreon link in the video description. Be sure to leave a comment if you want to give me feedback or ask me to cover something specific in the next video, and stay tuned for me to reveal the twist to the driving in the future. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time.